God, you have to be skinny to be able to get up here. Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. And Killarney actually holds a very special place in my heart because I come down here every Christmas to celebrate the life of Nathan O'Carroll, Marie and Dennis's son, who died by suicide several years ago. So I love Killarney, and I think it's the most beautiful town. And if I won the lotto, I'd move here in the morning, I swear to God. So I'm just going to talk briefly about Pieta. I'm usually asked two questions. Why did I start Pieta House? And the other question is, why did I call it Pieta House? So I suppose, like most people who've started charities, they usually start it from a personal experience. And Pieta House is no different. I lost my sister 12 years ago to suicide. And at that time, if you think about Ireland 12 years ago, you didn't speak the word suicide. You certainly didn't have an open discussion about it. And in fact, it was always marked with shame and incredible sadness and guilt. But what happened in this particular case was that after going through a terrible grieving time, as you can imagine, I'm sure there are many people here today who've also lost someone to suicide. I remember being given a book called Your Sorrow is My Sorrow. And at that time, I was reading everything I could about suicide, and I couldn't come up with any answer. I wanted someone to tell me, that person's life, your sister's life, couldn't have been saved. And in fact, the answer I kept getting was that most suicides can be prevented. So book after book after book, all about suicide and what to do and how to prevent it, and yet I still wasn't really getting anywhere until I was given this book called Your Sorrow is My Sorrow. And it was a book about Mary, the mother of Jesus. And it just spoke about her, about the different times in her life when she went through great difficulties. And every story that was spoken about her, that was written about her, it would be accompanied by a visual image that would describe the story in one picture. So you can see the image here says it all. And here this woman who's lost her only child, and here she is holding the dead, broken body of her son. And while this was a very heart-wrenching story, in fact, it wasn't the story that made me stand up and look at this. It was actually about the person who designed it, who sculpted it, Michelangelo. Michelangelo was only 23 years of age when he created this magnificent piece out of one large piece of marble. But what was extraordinary about him is that every single piece that he made, it would have a symbolic meaning. So just imagine this now. He was designing this sculpture on a man and a woman of about 2,000 years ago. And the reality was, 2,000 years ago, women were very, very small. They were only tiny little things. They were less than 5 foot. And it has been recorded that Jesus, in fact, was 33 years of age when he died. He was 6 foot tall, a big strap of a lad, right at the peak of his adulthood. But if you look at that image there, you will see that, in fact, Mary is bigger than her son. Her shoulders are very broad, and her lap is very deep. And she's holding him exactly the same way she held him when he was a baby. And what she is doing, she's embracing his death. And if you look at her face, she's the face of a very young woman, but she has the most majestic acceptance of this dead, broken man in her lap. And it was one of those light bulb moments when I thought that we need a living Pieta in every community in Ireland. And that's why it was called Pieta House, so that we can hold the broken lives of people who are in distress. So So next time you hear about Pieta House, try to remember why it was called that and what we're trying to do. We're trying to capture what Mary did for her son. So 9 years ago, we opened up, and we had 4 staff, including myself, and 1 centre that opened in Lucan. Roll on 9 years, we have 9 centres. We have 180 staff. Last year alone, we saw over 5,000 people. We saw children as young as 6 years of age to people in their 80s. You know, I'm sure, what the service is all about now. It's a free one-to-one, free services, one-to-one counselling, talking therapy. We're there to listen to why the person wants to die. They'll give us the reasons why they should die. And as Tony Humphrey said earlier, they actually don't want to die. They want to stop feeling this terrible pain. But when they've told us all the reasons why they want to die, they will also tell us the reasons why they want to live. And that's how our therapy works. We base it on that. So what has happened in Ireland has just really taken off. And it's really because of people like you. You know, people who have supported us, and you've done our Darkness into Light, and you've done other fundraising things. For what you have actually done, you've allowed us to expand. In the last couple of months, I've stepped aside as CEO. I'm working on an international front. It sounds so posh, doesn't it? And we've a new CEO who's going to make sure that we achieve our vision, which is to have a service within 100 kilometres of every single person in Ireland. That new CEO will make sure that happens. In the meantime, we should be opening in New York for the Irish community in New York in September. And they've all heard about Pieta House in New York, in the Irish communities. It's amazing. And in fact, they've all heard about Darkness into Light as well. So that's another lovely story. You know, Darkness into Light came about just by accident. You know, I was doing the marathon one year, walking it, let me hasten to add. And I met this girl who did 12 marathons. And I said to her, where was the best marathon you went to? And she said, actually in Boston. It was done in the middle of the night. And I remember thinking, God, wouldn't it be fabulous to have something like that over here? But we changed it a little bit. And we had it at 4 o'clock in the morning. And as you crossed the finish line, the dawn was breaking. And really another symbolic meaning behind it. Because we bring people from the dark into the light. So the first year we had it, 6 years old this year. 200 people, I think, turned up in the Phoenix Park. Last year, 80,000 people walked across our country. And this year we expect double. And we expect it because this is typical of the Irish. When they know there's a problem, they're willing, they're fearless. They're willing to face it. So those 80,000 people that walked last year were all talking about suicide and how to prevent it. I'm going to show you a little video which was taken in the Phoenix Park actually 2 years ago. And it's quite a moving piece. It was done by a volunteer. She just took photographs trying to capture the essence of the morning. And what was extraordinary about it, though, and this is what I want you to look at when you see this video, are all the children that went to it. But this is 4 o'clock in the morning. These are the parents getting their kids up to bring them out to this. Can you imagine the conversation that was going on between that child and their parents? Isn't that just amazing? Those children will never be like my generation. They'll never be afraid to talk about suicide, and they'll never be afraid to ask for help. It means that for the first time, and I really believe in Europe, that we are tackling the subject of suicide so compassionately. I said about opening in New York, they are at least 2 decades behind us. If someone is suicidal in New York, they call the police. And we are aiming at our Irish communities in New York, and in particular the undocumented Irish, the guys and the girls who are over there illegally. They can't go for help. They can't get any medical help. And I'm going to tell you just a very brief story. I was over there recently, and after a long day of meetings and things like that, myself and my colleague went into an Irish pub, and we sat up at the counter and we had something to eat, and of course we had something to drink. And the barman, a young man behind the counter, said, "You're Irish." And we said, "So are you." And he said, "Are you here for a holiday?" And I said, "No, we're actually here on business." And he said, "Oh, what sort of business?" And I told him, Pieta House. And he actually got very, very upset. And he said he and his brother came out to New York. And he was fine, he was able to get a job, and he was doing okay. But his brother started to fail. He couldn't get a job, he wasn't meeting people, he was alone all day because his brother was working. And he got very, very bad, very distressed. And he got so bad that the young man behind the counter had to get his parents to come over and bring him home. And I said, "So how is he now?" He said, "He's great. He's going to Pieta House in Limerick." And that just shows that we need a Pieta House wherever our Irish people are. And one of the things that also came up quite recently was when the Irish are in trouble abroad, all they want to do is to hear an Irish accent. So we're going. Anyway, one of the things I just want to finish up on, I think Deirdre asked me to speak about, if you're in distress, what sort of tips can I give you? I'm not going to give you any tips at all about if you're in distress. Because if you're in distress, no tip will help you. So one of the things that came very obvious to me in the last few years was that there's 3 approaches to reducing suicide in this country. One is obviously primary care, when someone does end up in hospital or along the psychiatric route. The second is organisations like Pieta House. But the third most important component of all are the people, the public like you. Because you're the very first one who's going to see the signs of someone that you either work with or that you live with. And while there will be some people who will show no signs, and that's going to happen, but the majority of people will show signs. And we have to remember a couple of things. Number one, suicide can happen to anyone. You don't need a long history of mental health issues. 9 out of 10 people who come to us never had a mental health issue. They're reacting to a life event. For example, when the recession hit Ireland, the suicide rates went up instantly, especially in the construction industry and with our farmers. So suicide can happen to anyone. And the other thing is, if you have seen loved ones or colleagues struggling before and you've seen them get over it, don't always be sure that they're going to get over it every time. So one of the things we came up with, and I was delighted to see that the leaflets are here today, we came up with just a very simple acronym, SIGNS, the signs of suicide. So I have them up there. So just very briefly, S is for sleep disturbance. We all know what it's like if we've had a bad night's sleep. The world's not the same place, is it, the next day? Everything seems darker. Just imagine if you had weeks of it. How would it be for you then? Sleep is the most crucial element, and if you know someone's not sleeping, they need to get some help. And people give out about sleeping tablets, but if it's okay for the short term to get someone back sleeping. I is for isolation. this person will start isolating themselves, and it will become very obvious. They will stop going for that pint. They won't come down to the canteen for a cup of coffee. They'll stop emailing or going online. They'll even turn off their mobile phone. They are withdrawing. They're not able to engage. So they isolate themselves. G is for giving away possessions, and while that doesn't happen all the time, it really, really does happen. Even children sometimes give away their possessions, their favourite CDs, or something that's meaningful for them. Let me just go down. So N is no interest in anything. And what I mean by that is someone who would have been mad into, say, the GA, the GAA, or mad into their music. They've stopped showing interest in it. Their performance at work or at school has changed. So these are quite obvious, these signs, when you see them. And S, I think this one, speaking the language of suicide, I think that and sleep are the most crucial ones to look out for. Speaking the language of suicide means when people come out with things like, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see any point. Or the most telling one of all, my family would be better off without me. And that is said, my own sister said it. They're the signs. Now, I'm not asking you to be a pop-up therapist. All I'm asking you to do is to be a link between that person who's in distress and an organisation like Pieta House. And I want to finish on something that to me is also crucial. I want you to imagine that your colleague in work or someone at home fell and they broke their leg. And you go over to them, are you all right there? Here's a phone. Off you go now and go and call an ambulance yourself. Could you imagine that scenario? You'd be running around after them. You'd be calling the ambulance. You'd go with them in the ambulance. You would make sure that you could do as much as possible. Not only bring them to the hospital, but when they come out. And just think now, someone who's broken emotionally. What do? We might ignore it. Or we might say, here, go and see Pieta House. There's a number. I can't understand why, to me, being broken is 100 million times worse than a broken leg. And that person needs you to bring them, to make that call. You know, there's lots of therapists around the country who won't receive a call from anybody except the person who needs the service. Now, I don't agree with that. Just the same way we don't expect the person who's a broken leg to make the call, we shouldn't expect the person who's broken to make a call. You know, one of the things, I've gone around Ireland so much, and other countries now, I cannot get over how hospitable and kind the Irish are. Honestly, and I'm not patting us on the back, this is the truth. We need to extend it just a little bit more. We need to stop being afraid. The person who might be in crisis is not going to attack you. It's not contagious. All they want is someone to understand and to be there for them. And all you have to do is make that call. Make a phone call for them and say, I'm going to do this for you. That is the only way we're going to reduce suicide in this country. It doesn't matter if there's 100 Pieta houses. It doesn't matter. It's you who's going to bring down suicide in this country by being alert and by reaching out and showing compassion. So that's really it. You're also very quiet. Are you always like this, or are you just... So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes if anybody wants to ask a question. If there are difficult ones, I want you to put on a postcard and send it to my colleague, send it to the new CEO. But seriously, if anybody wants to ask a question, I'd be happy, more than happy to answer it. No? Pardon? Okay, that lovely voice, by the way, is my husband. He's honestly reminding me to say that it's free of charge. Of course, it's free of charge. I forgot, did I not say that? Pat, you're fantastic, really. It's free of charge, and that is the beauty about it. Not only is it free of charge, and again, thanks for the prompt, anybody can make that phone call, and you don't need a GP's letter or a psychiatric report. That's why Pieta is so accessible. You have, at the moment it's in Castle Island, but it's opening at the end of this month in Tralee. So we'll have, I think, now one of the girls down there will be able to tell you, 2 days in Castle Island, 3 or 4 days in Tralee. Don't ask me the address. Someone maybe from the back, one of the girls, pardon? Miderwell. I can't understand Cora's accent. Do you want to shout it? Right, so that's where it is. Any other question? Pardon? Alcohol and suicide. Well, the thing is, we can't blame alcohol for making a person suicidal, because if that was the case, most of us would be suicidal. That's the reality. Alcohol doesn't make you suicidal. You must have the suicidal thoughts anyway. What alcohol does do, though, it sometimes removes the brakes. And it will make you do things that maybe if you were sober, you wouldn't have. Does that answer your question? Yeah. You're terribly polite down here in Kerry, aren't you? Pardon? You see, I need prompts all the flipping time. So the walk here in Killarney is on the 9th of May, along here somewhere, and we also are in Listowel. Where else? Oh, we're in Cork. Oh God, yeah, we've got 2 or 3 places in Cork. Where else, Cora, are we? Dingle, Listowel, and Killarney. There's 80 venues this year. Do you know it's going to be bigger than Paddy's Day eventually? And again, the Irish have created it. So, for example, in America, we're in Washington, D.C., in New York, and in Chicago. We are in 3 cities in Canada. We're in 4 cities in Australia. We're in 4 cities in England. And we're in 2 cities in Scotland. So it's going to be eventually, and as I said, you know, this is the Irish creating this again, another export, another fabulous export. What we try, because it's appointment-led, we have appointments, not a drop-in centre. So we have a therapist waiting for that client coming in. So what we try to do is, we try to have the hours that will reflect people's needs. So for example, in Dublin at the moment, we open until 9 o'clock at night, and we're open Saturday and Sunday. So what will happen here in Tralee is that one of the days that we're open will always be a Saturday. So again, to help people who may not be able to get off work or get away from school, or maybe someone who's feeling bad on a Friday night can come to us on a Saturday morning. So that's the extent of how we try to spread the hours. Is that okay? Well, what you have to remember is that everybody that comes to us is either suicidal or self-harming. This is all we do. We do absolutely nothing else. And what we're saying is we are an alternative to the A&E. So if someone comes to, they either have attempted suicide, by the way, and the chances are will go on to attempt again, or they have a very strong desire to take their life. So our model is, as I said, to listen to their reasons for dying. And if you stop thinking about them as being sick, they're emotionally distressed. So we listen to them, we listen to their reasons for dying, we also listen to their reasons for living, and then we use a therapy called solution-focused and strength-based therapy. In other words, and all our therapists, by the way, are fully qualified. So what that means is that they're coming with a problem. They're reacting to something. Either, with men, for example, there's 2 tipping points. One is anything to do with work. They lose their job, they're made redundant, retired, they've lost their business, has a crushing effect on men. Because their identity is usually wrapped up in that. So we identify what the problem is and we try to have a solution-focused approach to it. And when I talk about strength-based, we remind them of what they've already achieved in life. Tony spoke about, bringing up self-esteem. That's exactly what it's about. It's reminding people of how great they are. And we had a research paper done on us. And what it was when people left Pieta House, they got a phone call a month afterwards, 3 months afterwards, and 6 months afterwards to see how they were. And after 6 months, their suicidal tendencies had almost gone. And their self-esteem was continuing to rise. And it's all about self-esteem and how you think about yourself and how you think about your situation. But during that critical time, you need someone to hold your hand and get you through it. So that's really what we do. Mm. So you'd ring up and say, your sister or whoever is in a bad way, what can I do? We say, bring them along, and we'll do an assessment. And the assessment identifies, first of all, how high level of a risk they are, and also whether we're the right service. And then after that, they're assigned to a therapist. But, it's a bit like going to the dentist or going to the doctor. Nobody likes going by themselves, really. And why should it be any different when you're coming to something as distressing? Who really wants to go to Pieta House? Nobody does. Nobody wants to admit that they've got to go to Pieta House. So having someone go with them is so reassuring. Anybody else? Aye. So we allocate 15 sessions. But those 15 sessions are crucially mapped out. So, for example, if they're very, very high risk, we will see them every single day. If they're relatively medium risk, we would see them at least 3 times a week. But we have found that by the time they get to their 8th or 10th session, their crisis is over. They've come through it. Yeah. Oh, we still keep going on. We give them 15 sessions, but also the other thing that's really important, say it happens to them again in a year's time, they can come back to us. If it happens in 3 months' time, they can come back to us. It doesn't matter if they're feeling suicidal. It doesn't matter how many times they come back. They keep coming back to us. Now, it doesn't happen that often, by the way. But when you're right in the thick of that crisis with that person, and they see they are actually surviving, that gives them the courage to know that they can do this. They're achieving it themselves, even though, as I said, we're holding their hand. But they are achieving it themselves. Last year, 6 people went on to take their lives after coming to Pieta House. And I don't know if anybody would ever realise the devastating effect it has on us, especially the therapist who's dealing with the person. They are mourning too. It is their bereavement as well. And what happens, we close down. We all come together, all the therapists come together in that whichever centre. And we mourn and celebrate the life of the person who died. And we give enormous support to the therapist who was dealing with the person and the receptionist. But if you think 5,000 people came to us last year, and I can't even say, I wouldn't even bring myself to say, only 6 died. 6 is 6 too many. But what I'd like to think about with the nearly 5,000 people who did decide to live, to survive and thrive. Is that okay? Okay. Really? That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, well, is sad? Is she suffering from sad seasonal affect disorder? Well, what we have found, which is extraordinary, is that at Christmas, the amount of people that come to us drops dramatically. And of course, the numbers come up again in January. But think about why, and this is what I'm saying about reaching out. At Christmas, we all become a little bit nicer. We think of the neighbour who's no one to have Christmas dinner with, or we think of that brat of a sister that I haven't been speaking to for months. I'm going to ring her now and just say Happy Christmas to her. And we reach out and we are kinder. And that's what happens. People, the numbers coming to Pieta just drop dramatically up to Christmas. And then when January comes and things go back to normal, and it's a very depressing month anyway. I think the 3rd Monday in January is supposed to be the most depressing day of the year. The numbers of people attending us come up. So I've never heard of the spring-autumn thing before. I've heard of the winter thing, sad, but not the spring or autumn. There was a man that shouted a minute ago. Yeah, we don't care. We don't care what you're on. We deal and work very effectively with other organisations. That referral pathway is crucial because we could get someone who really does need to be placed on medication. So we need to have that open conversation. We also deal with other organisations that have nothing to do with suicide or mental health issues. Might be dealing with relationship problems or bereavement like Console over there, where we would refer. And that engagement is crucial. We shouldn't be all sort of holding on to our little patch. It's about, we're all trying to help people in our community. Hi. And at that moment, I don't know if everybody can hear this man. He's talking about a friend of his whose brother took his life and just basically collapsed one day physically. But his sister came up a couple of days before he took his life and said, "No, you're not going to do anything silly, are you? You're not going to do anything." And he said, No, I'm not." At that moment, he would have meant that. At that moment, he absolutely would have meant that. But, when you say he just collapsed and he sat down on a stone, mentally, I know that. Yeah, no, I know, and he sat down. But actually, physically, he was broken too, and mentally. But one of the things you said that his brother said that he felt so bad that he didn't help him more. The worst emotion of all is guilt, and every single one of us experiences it. You're talking about that man who was a brother. He wasn't a psychologist. I'm a psychologist, and I didn't see it in my sister. So you can imagine my guilt. And that's what I mean by saying if people show the signs of suicide. I remember Catherine saying that, that she didn't see the point. She thought her family would be better off without her. And I remember rubbing her arm and saying, "Don't be silly." So guilt is the most awful thing. But you need to tell that man that he didn't know the signs. How could he know? And this is what I'm trying to get people to do, is to learn the signs. Okay. Now, before I depress you even further, because I'm looking at the faces of sorrow around here. The mother of sorrow, my mother would say. I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for all your support. And if anybody's done the walk, anybody's done the walk, the Darks Into Light walk here? Yeah, you're fabulous. You're the best looking people in the room. There's no two ways about it. Please do it this year. I know the weather was appalling last year. In fact, Killarney was the only one that it lashed on, even though it lashed in Dublin, but lashed in Dublin after the walk. So you're very brave to have done it. But even if you only do it once, the experience is absolutely incredible. And what you're doing, you're shouting out loud that we're doing something against suicide. We're not going to be afraid anymore. Thanks very much. Sorry, before I go. Yes, that girl. We are the fifth highest in Europe with young men. We're actually quite low on all the other areas, but with young men we're the fifth highest. But the reality is that, again, you know, as I said about the Darkness into Light thing, we are turning that. Young men aren't dying as much. The rates are coming down. And I think women, and you know, when we started this campaign, this movement called Mind Our Men, I was aiming it at women. Because, and forgive me, gentlemen, who, you know, but women have an uncanny way of being able to notice something without words being needed. You know, for example, if you saw your child coming up the hall, or your husband or your partner, you know by the way they're walking in that hall what sort of form they're in. You know by the look at their face that they're not in good form. And it's just an ability that we have, a skill that we have. But a few years ago, we were looking at the numbers coming to Pieta House, and we saw 52% were women and 48% were men, and we thought, God, this is great. We're really doing something really well here, because men don't normally attend services. And when we analysed it a little further, we discovered it was women who made the appointments for them. And we do that anyway, don't we? We make the appointments for the dentist or for the doctor. At least I do, Pat, make the appointments for you. But women do tend to do that. And what we were trying to say is, look, we have good coping mechanisms ourselves. Now, okay, women can have terrible problems as well and die by suicide. But if you think of it, every single week, 10 people die, 8 of them are men. So we need to tackle the biggest number first. By asking women to use their intuition, to use the skills that they have, and to be the link between someone who might be in distress and to call us. We also do a thing with companies now. And we've done huge things with the Irish Farmers Association, with the GAA. So, for example, we would train people to spot the signs in work. I mean, if you're sitting with a colleague 8 hours a day, you know them inside out. You know what form they're in. You know what's going on in their house and all that sort of, all the issues that they may have. Surely it should be you who'd be able to say, I see you're different. I see a change in you. You don't seem yourself. So this is why we're trying to tell people, look at the signs, be aware. That thing today, this program, this conference today, be aware, is superbly said. Be aware not of yourself, of the person next to you.